All right, so get ready because we are going deep, deep inside the mind of an emperor today. We're diving into Meditations, the personal writings of Marcus Aurelius.
And I bet some of you were like, ugh, another Roman emperor. What could he possibly have to say that's relevant to my life?
Yeah, I get it. But here's the thing. Meditations wasn't some big public speech or anything. It's more like we're getting a peek at his private diary, really.
Exactly. It's like eavesdropping on his inner thoughts as he's trying to figure out this whole Stoic philosophy thing.
And not only that, but he's trying to apply it while running an empire. Like, talk about pressure.
And during some seriously chaotic times, too. War, plagues, political backstabbing, the whole 9 yards.
So how did this philosophy, Stoicism, actually shape his actions as an emperor? Did he walk the walk, or was it all just talk? That's what we're going to try to figure out today.
That's a great question. And what makes it even more intriguing is that despite being called the Philosopher King, the intro to Meditations kind of hints that he wasn't this totally revolutionary leader that you might expect.
Right, like maybe his actions didn't always perfectly match up with his ideals. Okay, but before we go too far down that road, maybe we should back up a bit. Um, could you give us the Spark Notes version of who Marcus Aurelius was? How did he even end up in this crazy position?
Okay, so Marcus Aurelius was Roman emperor in the 2nd century AD, a period filled with, well, everything I just mentioned, wars, plagues, political maneuvering. But he wasn't, like, born into the imperial family or anything.
So no, like son inherits the throne kind of deal.
Not at all. He was actually adopted by the previous emperor, Antoninus Pius. It was all part of a carefully planned out succession strategy.
Wow, so they were really thinking ahead, trying to keep things stable in what sounds like a very unstable time.
Exactly. And to make things even more interesting, Antoninus made Marcus adopt Lucius Verus as co-emperor.
Wait, whoa, co-emperor, like two emperors at the same time. Now that's got to be a whole other can of worms.
It definitely created some, let's say, unique challenges, and we'll definitely dig into that relationship later on.
Looking forward to that. But let's get back to Marcus and Meditations. You mentioned it wasn't always called that.
Right. The original title was To Himself.
To himself. I kind of like that better. I mean, it really drives home the personal nature of these writings, right?
Totally. It
Yeah.
wasn't written for an audience. Almost makes it feel like more authentic, maybe.
Yeah, like we're getting a raw, unfiltered look at his thoughts.
And in these raw entries, we find him wrestling with everything you can imagine, like dilemmas about leading an empire, personal anxieties, even those big, timeless questions. What's the meaning of life? What happens after we die?
Yeah, the kind of stuff we all think about sometimes. And the way he writes is so different from what you'd expect, too. It's not like some big, long philosophy lecture. It's more like little snippets. Almost like he's jotting down these thoughts whenever they pop into his head.
That's exactly what makes it so compelling. It's immediate, present. Oh, there's one quote I really like that gets at this. He says, "They are like this because they can't tell good from evil."
Hmm, that's a bit of a head-scratcher. What's he getting at there?
Well, it gets to the heart of Stoic philosophy, this idea that people do bad things out of ignorance, not because they're, like, inherently bad.
Oh, okay, so maybe not blaming people, but trying to understand them. That's definitely a different way of looking at things. But to really grasp what he's saying here, I think we need to dive into this whole Stoicism thing. Can you give us like a Stoicism 101?
Sure. Stoicism is a complex philosophy, but one of its key ideas is the concept of logos, this idea that there's a rational order that governs the entire universe. Like some people might call it nature, others might call it providence, or even God.
So there's like a grand plan, a set order to everything that happens.
Right. And this idea leads to the concept of determinism, basically that everything that happens is preordained like it's meant to be.
But wouldn't that make you like passive? If everything is already decided, why even bother doing anything?
That's where things get interesting, because the Stoics believed that while we can't control what happens to us, we can control how we react to it.
So it's not about giving up control, but about understanding what you can't control, which is basically yourself, right?
Exactly. And that's not always easy. But that's where the 3 disciplines of Stoicism come in.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break those down for me.
So the first discipline is perception. This is all about seeing things objectively, like without letting your emotions cloud your judgment.
So basically, don't freak out when things go wrong. Easier said than done.
Right. And that's where action comes in. It's about taking action that's in line with nature, doing what's good for you and the people around you.
So it's not about being passive, but about choosing to act in a way that aligns with your values.
Exactly. And finally, we have will. This is about accepting what you can't control. Like, you can't control the weather, you can't control other people's actions, but you can control how you respond to those things.
So perception helps you see things clearly, action guides you to do the right thing, and will helps you accept what you can't change. Sounds like a recipe for, like, inner peace or something.
It can be, but it's definitely not a quick fix. And what makes meditation so fascinating is that we see Marcus, this emperor, actually trying to put these ideas into practice, not just talking about them.
Right. He's not just giving us a lecture on Stoicism, he's living it, or at least trying to.
Exactly. I mean, imagine he's dealing with wars, plagues, political scheming, and he's trying to apply these principles to that.
Makes you wonder if he ever felt like a hypocrite. Like, here I am preaching Stoicism, but I'm totally losing my cool over this political mess.
Well, I think it's more accurate to say that he saw his struggles as part of the process. Like, Stoicism wasn't about being perfect, but about constantly striving to improve yourself.
So he wasn't shooting for perfection, just for progress.
Exactly. And I think that's something that really resonates with people today. Like, we all want to be better, but life is messy, right? Marcus in Meditations shows us that it's okay to screw up, to struggle, as long as you keep trying to live up to your values.
And through his struggles, we connect with him. Even though he was an emperor, he's human, just like us.
Absolutely. And his challenges weren't exactly like everyday problems. We're talking about real serious stuff like war and a devastating plague. In Meditations, there's even a passage where he talks about dealing with meddling, ungrateful, arrogant people.
Wait, an emperor complaining about annoying people?
Mhm.
That's strangely comforting, actually. You'd think he could just, get rid of those people.
Even emperors have to deal with difficult personalities, and his reflections on dealing with those situations, they offer valuable insights, even today, I think.
So he wasn't just some untouchable ruler. He was a real person, dealing with the same kind of stuff we all deal with.
Precisely. And that's part of what makes meditation so relatable and powerful, even after all these centuries. He was trying to live a good life, just like us, trying to figure things out in a world that often feels totally unpredictable and chaotic.
And trying to do it all while running an empire. Which makes you wonder, like, how did he even find the time to write this stuff down? Was it something he set aside time for, or just, scribbling down thoughts whenever he had a free moment?
Well, from what we know, he never meant to publish Meditations. Historians think it was more like, personal notes, just thoughts and reflections that he jotted down when he could.
So picture this. After a long day of dealing with, well, everything an emperor has to deal with, he's in his room, finding a quiet moment to just process it all, write down his thoughts.
Yeah, and that makes it even more, well, intimate somehow, knowing that these were his private musings, raw and unfiltered.
Like we're getting this special glimpse into his inner world, his doubts, his frustrations, but also those moments of insight and clarity.
And speaking of those insights, I'm curious about the thinkers who influenced him, like who helped him develop this whole Stoic framework, who were his philosophical hero. There are quite a few, actually, but Socrates definitely stands out. His focus on virtue, his acceptance of death, even his trial and execution, all of that really impacted Marcus and the Stoics.
It's interesting how even someone like Socrates, who lived centuries before Marcus, could still have such an influence.
Right. And there's a quote in Meditations that kind of echoes Socrates' ideas. Remember that line? They are like this because they can't tell good from evil.
Yeah, the one we talked about earlier. So Marcus was drawing from Socrates to try and understand why people do bad things.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, hey, maybe they're not bad people, just ignorant, which, might be a more compassionate way of seeing things.
It's definitely a challenge to put into practice, though, right? Like when someone's really getting on your nerves.
Oh, for sure. But it's something to think about. And then there's Heraclitus, another big influence. He was all about the idea of constant change.
Oh, yeah, that you can't step in the same river twice guy.
That's the one. And his ideas are all over Meditations. That sense of flow, of everything being in flux, it's kind of baked into Marcus's writing style.
Right, those short, fragmented entries. It's almost like we're watching his thoughts evolve in real time.
And both Socrates and Heraclitus, they shaped not just how Marcus thought, but also how he wrote.
And as much as Meditations is this deep dive into philosophy, it also has these really personal moments. Like in book 1, there's this thank you list where he expresses gratitude for all these things in his life.
Yeah, that's such a cool part of the book, isn't it? He's grateful for his family, his teachers, even just having a healthy body.
Which is kind of surprising for an emperor, right? You'd think he'd be focused on, I don't know, conquering new lands or something.
Right. It's like he's acknowledging his privilege, but also recognizing that even an emperor is human, vulnerable in a way.
And I think that vulnerability is part of what makes meditation so compelling. It's not just an emperor spouting wisdom from on high. It's a real person grappling with life's big questions.
Exactly. And one of those big questions, one that we all have to face eventually, is death.
Yeah, and Stoicism has a very specific way of looking at death, right?
Definitely. For Stoics, death is the ultimate example of what we can't control. It's just part of the natural order, like the changing seasons or, well, anything in nature, really.
And Marcus, he definitely wasn't afraid to talk about death. But it's not morbid or depressing. It's more like he's trying to make peace with it. Like
Yeah.
in that passage where he compares life to like a sea voyage.
Oh, yeah. You boarded, you set sail, you've made the passage, time to disembark. It's so powerful, right?
Totally. It makes death seem less scary, more like just the next stage of the journey. But it also makes you think about how you're spending your time on that journey. If we all know we're going to disembark eventually, maybe that makes every moment more precious.
For sure. And that's the whole point, I think, of the Stoic perspective on death. It's not about dwelling on the negative, but about living more fully in the present moment.
So it's not about like ignoring death, but about using it as motivation to make the most of the time you have.
Exactly. And this ties into another theme that pops up a lot in meditations: duty.
Right, because Marcus was super aware of his responsibilities,
Yeah.
not just as emperor, but as a person, right?
Absolutely. And his sense of duty wasn't about power or glory, but about service. Like, he was using his position to try to benefit others, to live in a way that, as he put it, nature requires.
Like he saw himself as playing a specific role within the bigger scheme of things.
Exactly. He
Yeah.
recognized his place in the cosmos, and he was trying to live in accordance with that.
Which in his case meant leading with justice and compassion, which couldn't have been easy with everything going on around him.
No kidding. Wars, plagues, political turmoil.
Yeah.
You gotta wonder how he managed to stay sane, let alone try to be a good ruler on top of it all.
But that's what makes meditation so human and relatable, right?
Yeah.
We see him wrestling with these huge challenges, trying to apply these lofty philosophical ideas to messy real-life situations.
It's not some perfect guide to Stoicism. It's a real person grappling with life, and that includes those moments of frustration.
Like, even emperors get annoyed by people sometimes.
Exactly. We see his struggles, his doubts, even those times when he just wants to be like, oh, enough already. And that's comforting in a weird way.
Like, okay, if even Marcus Aurelius gets frustrated, maybe I'm not doing so bad.
Huh. Right. We see his humanity, his imperfections, and that makes his insights all the more powerful because it shows that we can all strive for this kind of wisdom, this kind of inner peace, even when things are tough.
Absolutely. And speaking of wisdom, I was really struck by his reflections on his adoptive father, Antoninus Pius. It's clear he had a ton of respect for him, saw him as a role model.
Oh, yeah, that's a beautiful part of meditations. You can tell how much Marcus admired Antoninus, and Antoninus was known for being a just and peaceful ruler, which is definitely something Marcus aspired to.
There's that passage where he talks about all the things he learned from his father, his compassion, his work ethic, even his sense of humor.
Right, and his dogged determination to treat people as they deserved. That sounds pretty stoic, right?
It does. It makes you wonder if some of Marcus's stoicism came from his father's influence.
That's a good question, and I think it points to another layer in Marcus's story. Because he wasn't born into this role, he was chosen, adopted. And I wonder if that added a sense of pressure for him, a need to prove himself worthy of his father's legacy.
That's a great point. He wasn't just trying to live up to some abstract philosophical ideal. He was also trying to honor the man who had entrusted him with this enormous responsibility.
Exactly. And that tension between personal aspiration and philosophical ideals, it's all over meditations.
It's like we're seeing philosophy in action applied to real life,
Yeah.
with all its messiness and complications.
Right, because life isn't neat and tidy. And meditations reflects that. It's not a polished philosophical treatise. It's more like, well, a collection of thoughts, almost like someone's stream of consciousness.
Yeah, it jumps around a lot,
Mm.
from personal reflections to quotes from other thinkers to these big philosophical insights.
It's like we're peeking inside his mind, seeing how he processed the world around him.
And it's interesting how, even though it's this kind of jumbled collection of thoughts, there are still recurring themes that pop up, like his fascination with nature, his reflections on death, his struggles with leadership.
Right. It's not random. You can tell he's grouping certain ideas together, trying to make sense of them. And that makes sense given everything that was going on around him. The Roman Empire was facing some serious challenges during his reign.
Wars, plagues, political instability. It's kind of amazing he had the mental space to do any kind of deep thinking.
Right. It makes you wonder if all that chaos actually fueled his need for inner peace, for this kind of stoic framework to help him deal with all the craziness.
It's like Stoicism gave him the tools to find some calm amidst the storm.
Exactly. And those tools, those stoic principles, they're just as relevant today, aren't they?
Oh, totally. We might not be fighting off barbarian hordes, but our world feels pretty chaotic too in its own way.
Right. We're constantly bombarded with information, feeling pressure to achieve, to succeed. It's easy to get overwhelmed and lose sight of what really matters.
And maybe that's why Stoicism, and meditations in particular, is having this kind of resurgence. It's like people are searching for a way to find peace in the midst of all the noise.
For sure. And it's not just about inner peace, it's also about living with purpose. Marcus, with his focus on duty and virtue, he's reminding us that we're not just here to survive, we're here to contribute, to make a difference, even if it's a small one.
And he did all of this while running an empire. It's hard enough to manage your own life, let alone an entire civilization.
I know, right? It makes meditations even more impressive. And I think that's why it resonates with a lot of people in leadership positions today. It's not a how-to guide, but it offers these timeless insights into what it means to lead with integrity and purpose.
It's like a reminder that true leadership isn't about power or ego. It's about serving others, about using your influence to try and make the world a little bit better.
Beautifully said. And to fully understand Marcus's approach to leadership, we need to talk about Lucius Verus, his co-emperor. Remember that whole two-emperor thing we mentioned earlier?
Oh, yeah. I'm dying to know more about that whole dynamic. Two emperors ruling at the same time. Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It definitely had its challenges. And history paints Lucius Verus as a very different character for Marcus. Like, he was known for being a bit of a party animal, more into gladiatorial games than governing.
Which makes you wonder, how did these two, with such different personalities, even manage to share power?
Well, their relationship seems to have been pretty complex. A mix of cooperation and tension, probably. And Marcus doesn't sugarcoat Lucius's flaws and meditations, but there's also a sense that he cared about him, like a brother almost.
Like he was trying to understand him, maybe even guide him a bit.
Maybe. And they had to work together, especially during that Parthian War. It would be fascinating to know what was going through Marcus's head as he was writing some of those entries.
Talk about a high-pressure work environment.
Right, and it reminds us that even the most philosophical leaders have to deal with the realities of politics. People and power dynamics don't always cooperate with your ideals, even when you're the emperor.
Which brings us back to the question we started with. Did Marcus Aurelius actually live up to his own philosophy? Was he able to walk the walk, or was it all just talk?
That's the thing about meditations, it doesn't give us easy answers. It's not a rule book. It's one man's journey, his personal struggle to live a good life, even while dealing with the pressures and temptations of power.
And it's his struggles, his imperfections, that make him so relatable, I think.
Absolutely. He shows us that even a philosopher king is human. He makes mistakes, has moments of doubt, gets frustrated, but it's the intention, the commitment to keep trying to be better that really matters. And that's a message that's just as powerful today as it was back then.
For sure. And while we focused a lot on Marcus and his personal journey, it's important to remember that he was also a product of his time, shaped by the intellectual and philosophical currents of the Roman Empire.
Right. To really appreciate meditations, we need to understand the context in which it was written. Stoicism wasn't the only philosophy around back then. There were lots of different schools of thought, all competing for attention.
So how did Stoicism stand out? What drew Marcus to this particular philosophy?
Well, Stoicism offered a way to find meaning and purpose in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. It provided a framework for dealing with difficult emotions, for accepting what you can't control and focusing on what you can. And those ideas really clicked with Marcus's personality and his sense of duty.
He seemed to be drawn to reason, to justice, to serving others. And Stoicism offered a way to embody those values.
Exactly. And it gave him a way to handle the pressures of being emperor. That stoic emphasis on self-control, on finding peace within, it would have been invaluable in his position.
It's like Stoicism gave him a way to stay grounded, even when everything around him was going crazy.
Right. But it wasn't just about passively accepting fate. Remember, Stoicism also emphasizes action. It's about aligning your actions with your values, with what you believe is right.
So it's not about giving up and letting things happen. It's about understanding what you can control and then taking responsibility for your choices and your actions.
Exactly. And that's why meditations is so inspiring. It's not just theory, it's a real person trying to live out these principles to apply them to his own life and his own challenges.
And you can tell that Marcus didn't just blindly accept Stoic teachings. He engaged with them, drawing from a whole range of sources and thinkers.
Totally. He quotes from his philosophical heroes, Socrates, Heraclitus, Epictetus. He even pulls wisdom from poets and playwrights.
It's like he created this tapestry of wisdom, weaving together all these different threads to create his own unique philosophical perspective.
And I think that tapestry reflects the intellectual world of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
There was a real mixing of ideas happening, Greek philosophy blending with Roman pragmatism.
So Marcus wasn't just a Stoic, he was also a product of his time, absorbing and synthesizing all these different intellectual currents.
Precisely. And this blend of influences, it's part of what makes meditation so relevant to us today. It's not a rigid, dogmatic text. It's a fluid, evolving exploration of what it means to live a good life.
And even though it's rooted in ancient philosophy, it still speaks to us, doesn't it? We find our own questions, our own struggles, reflected in Marcus's reflections on death, duty, and searching for meaning in a world that often feels chaotic.
Absolutely. And his emphasis on self-control, on accepting what we can't control and focusing on what we can, it's so relevant in our modern world, which often feels overwhelming and out of control.
Like he's offering us a different way of seeing the world, a way to find peace and purpose amidst all the craziness.
That's the power of Stoicism, right? It's not about escaping the world. It's about navigating it with wisdom and resilience, even when things are tough.
But it's not just the philosophy that makes meditation so compelling. It's also those glimpses we get into Marcus's personal life, his relationships with the people around him.
Right. We see him as a son, a husband, a father, a friend, not just an emperor.
And those relationships, both good and bad, they clearly shaped his worldview and his philosophy.
For sure. And I think his reflections on his adoptive father, Antoninus Pius, are some of the most moving parts of Meditations.
Definitely. You can tell how much he admired Antoninus, saw him as a role model for leadership and virtue.
And remember, Antoninus was known for being a just and peaceful ruler, which is something Marcus clearly aspired to.
There's that one line where Marcus lists all the things he loved about his father, his compassion, his work ethic, his sense of humor. He even praises his dogged determination to treat people as they deserved.
Which sounds very stoic, doesn't it? It's like we're seeing where Marcus got some of his values.
And those personal reflections, they're what make meditation so timeless, I think. We connect with Marcus not just as a philosopher king, but as a fellow human being dealing with the same stuff we all deal with.
Exactly. And those struggles, those very human moments, they make his insights even more powerful because he's not offering us easy answers, but rather a way of thinking, a way of being that can help us navigate the challenges of life.
So we have this incredible book, a window into the mind of an emperor, who's wrestling with life's big questions while also dealing with all the pressures of running an empire. But Meditations is also a product of its time, reflecting the philosophical and cultural influences that shaped Marcus's thinking. And I think that brings us to what makes it so captivating. Its legacy. How did this book become so influential? Why are we still talking about it today?
It's a fascinating story, actually, because Meditations was never intended for an audience. It was a private journal. And yet, somehow, it survived, it was rediscovered, and it continues to speak to people centuries later.
Yeah, it's a story of survival and rediscovery, but also a testament to the book's enduring power. Why has it resonated with so many people across so many different cultures and time periods?
That's the question we're going to try to answer in our next dive. The journey of Meditations through history is as interesting as the book itself. So we've talked about how Marcus Aurelius seemed to find this kind of peace, this wisdom in nature. Remember how those images of plants and animals and the seasons pop up throughout Meditations?
Yeah, it's like he's constantly looking to the natural world for guidance, you know?
Exactly. And there's this one passage that always gets me thinking. He's talking about a branch, and he compares a branch that's always been part of a tree to one that was, like, grafted on.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. It's almost like a little parable or something, right?
It is. And it makes you wonder if he was thinking about his own life, you know? Being adopted into the imperial family, maybe a part of him always felt a little out of place, like he was grafted onto this world of power and responsibility.
Ooh, that's a really interesting take on it. It kind of makes you rethink that whole Stoic idea of fate and choice, doesn't it? Like, they believed we can't control what happens to us, but we can control how we react. But did Marcus ever wonder if he could have chosen a different path, a life outside the palace walls?
It's a good question. It's like that analogy we talked about earlier, the dog tied to the wagon. Marcus was, in a way, tied to the wagon of the Roman Empire. It was his destiny. But it seems like he chose to make the most of it, to run alongside that wagon, embrace his duty, even when it was hard.
And that's what makes his writings on leadership so powerful. Because he wasn't born into this role, he was chosen for it. And yet, he still found meaning and purpose in serving others, which I think speaks to something that a lot of us can relate to. We don't always get to choose our circumstances, our obligations.
Right, like sometimes life just throws stuff at you that you never saw coming.
Exactly. But we can choose how we respond to those things. We can
Mhm.
choose to find meaning, to make the best of it, even when it's not what we planned.
And meditations, in a way, it gives us a kind of guide for that journey, you know? It's not about achieving this perfect state of stoic happiness or whatever. It's about showing up every day and doing the best you can, making choices that align with what you believe in, even when it's tough.
And that's why, even though he was an emperor who lived almost 2,000 years ago, his words still feel so relevant today. Like those struggles, those big questions about how to live a good life, they're timeless.
Totally. And the book itself, I mean, it's had this incredible journey through history. Think about it, it was almost lost forever when the Roman Empire fell apart, all that chaos.
So much knowledge disappeared during that time. It's amazing anything survived.
It is. But meditations did survive because these dedicated scholars recognized its value and kept copying it, preserving it. And then centuries later, it was rediscovered during the Renaissance, like it was just waiting to be brought back to life.
And suddenly, Marcus was speaking to a whole new audience, offering his wisdom to a world that was going through its own kind of transformation. It's amazing how a book, a personal journal really, could have this kind of ripple effect across time and cultures.
It really shows the power of ideas, doesn't it? How they can endure, how they can connect us, even across vast stretches of time.
In Meditations, with its insights into human nature, into leadership, into dealing with the ups and downs of life, I mean, it still resonates with people from all walks of life.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that we're not alone in our struggles, you know, that the search for meaning and purpose, that's a human thing. It's a journey we're all on together.
And the tools for that journey, things like self-awareness, discipline, compassion, a sense of duty, those are things that are available to everyone, not just emperors.
So true. And as we wrap up our deep dive into meditations, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Remember that Marcus found strength and guidance in nature. Well, nature's always changing, evolving, adapting. Maybe we can too. Maybe we can embrace that constant change, find the courage to grow and adapt, just like that grafted branch finding its place on a new tree.
That's a great image to keep in mind.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that the journey towards living a good life, it's not a destination, it's a process. It's about constantly striving, learning, and becoming the best version of ourselves.
Beautifully said. And maybe that's the ultimate lesson of meditations. It's not about finding all the answers, but about asking the right questions, the questions that lead us to deeper understanding, to greater wisdom.
So, as we say farewell to Marcus Aurelius and his timeless wisdom, remember his words. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one.